Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this first in a series of three Talking Heads discussions that we're holding over the next few weeks. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. David Hopes, who is kicking us off this year, Head of Leeds Museums and Galleries. I've got a series of questions that I'm going to put to David, but please use the Q&A function if there's anything that crops up during the course of the conversation that you want further clarification on, or if there's a question that emerges, and I'll try and cover those as best I can over the next half hour. But I'm going to start off by saying welcome, David. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I thought it would be useful just as a sort of a kickoff, just for you to say a little bit about yourself. What brought you to Leeds? Just give us a feel for your background, really.
Okay. Well, my name's David Hopes. I was born a very long time ago, 50 years in fact, in Kilmarnock in Ayrshire in Scotland. My first degree was in chemistry, believe it or not. So I studied chemistry at Glasgow University, and then I did a bit of traveling and thought I'd better do something with my life beyond traveling. Did an arts degree with the Open University, and while I was based in Pembrokeshire in southwest Wales, I thought just as a way of passing some time, I would volunteer in Tenby Museum and Art Gallery. Really enjoyed it. So I thought, well, what do you need to do to work in one of these places? Found it really inspirational. So I did a master's in museum studies after that, and then got my first job as a curator. And my first job as a curator was in a historic house museum, a literary museum in Ayrshire. I then went on to work in various different museum settings for the Open Museum, for example, in Glasgow, worked for a university museum in St Andrews, worked on some new capital projects for museums. And then I did a research fellowship with the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon, because the beginnings of my career in museums was in a literary museum, as I mentioned. Got a PhD as part of that, and then I became a director. So the PhD helped really me, transition from curator to director. And then I washed up at the head office of the organisation I was working with, National Trust for Scotland, and became the head of collections and interiors for a national organisation. So that was back in 2016. And then in 2021, the Leeds job came up. And I thought, well, I've been working in a policy position for a number of years now. I really miss practice. Leeds has an amazing collection, and the service reputation is national as well. So it's got a really good rep. So I applied and got the job as head of collections. So so that's my career in a nutshell, essentially.
Well, I did A-level chemistry, and or tried to do A-level chemistry, and got booted out after a year. So so probably just as well I didn't follow your path, because I think I definitely would have stalled.
Well, I haven't used chemistry since I left university anyway, but it's a beautiful science. But one of the great lessons for me in education, especially higher education, is humility. So I soon realized that there were much better chemists in my year than me, and people who are much more interested in the subject. So I got the degree, and then I diversified, let's say, and I much preferred doing the arts degree. But no harm to chemistry. Mrs. Thatcher was a chemist.
That's true. That's true.
So yes. That's normally a conversation ender, but but yeah, it's just to say that chemistry is a bit like English in a sense. It's a kind of base degree. And from that, people go on to do all sorts of different things, even politics.
As you've proved, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, you say about what the attraction of coming to Leeds, given what we do in Leeds, and I think I'm right in saying I think that we have the largest sort of local authority service in the country, or certainly one of the largest.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. There are others that are larger in terms of the number of objects, the number of visitors, but they have gone into trust. So Birmingham, for example, Glasgow is another one. So they're bigger than Leeds, but the fact is we've been retained within the local authority. So we get core funding from Leeds City Council. So in terms of local authority run museums, we're the largest in England.
Are there advantages in having it under the local authority umbrella as against the trust sort of model?
Well, definitely, and I think the pandemic proved that, really. So for those museum services that went into trust, they really struggled during the pandemic, generally speaking. because they're exposed, if you like, to the market, and they increasingly had to raise much more of their income from secondary spend and from admission charges, etc. Because of the pandemic and its effect on the marketplace, they found they were in deficit very quickly. Whereas in Leeds, because we're core-funded from the local authority, that didn't happen to us. That's not to say that we've become complacent. We're always required to evolve and change. But I think the kind of setup that we have in Leeds here has safeguarded against some of the shocks of the pandemic. But as I say, we're constantly evolving.
Just remind us what is covered within your remit in terms of the locations, the buildings, the collections, etc.
Well, one of the attractions for Leeds, apart from the reputation of the service, is the mixed nature of the portfolio. So we have two stately homes. I'm in one at the moment, Lotherstone Hall. We also run Temple Newsome House. We've got two industrial museums, Thwaite Watermill, which we rent from the Canal and River Trust, and Leeds Industrial Museum, which is housed in Armley Mills. We have City Museum, we have City Art Gallery, we have the Discovery Centre, which is where the bulk of our collection is stored and where my main office is. We have Abbey House Museum, which is a showcase really for social history of Leeds. And we have a Cistercian Abbey, Kirkstall Abbey. So it's a really mixed portfolio, which in some ways reflects the life and the story of the city, and in some ways it doesn't. So it's historical accident in some senses how these items came to be owned by the local authority, but in another sense it gives a really good overview of the story of Leeds as a city.
So I guess you've been in the city a little while now, and I know you developed a new strategy a couple of years ago. Could you sort of tell us a bit about that in terms of what the plans are for the next few years and what that strategy tells you?
Well, I started in 2021, so we were coming out of the pandemic at that point, and I was keen that our service strategy was coming to an end then anyway. So as a new broom, I was full of questions for my new colleagues, and we took 6 to 12 months actually in a really extensive conversation internally largely, but also with other stakeholders about what was important to society and what was important to the service. And we came up with a 5-year strategy, which is called Deepening Connections, Widening Impact. So that's very much the strategy itself, which runs over 5 years, has a focus on the individual and on depth and quality, understanding more about our own practice. And through those things, we would then seek to widen impact. I think there was a reflex response from some museum services, which I won't name, which was we need to get back to pre-pandemic levels of visitor numbers, school visits, engagements, etc. Whereas our service was really taking time to reflect on what is important essentially to all of us, and including our visitors, of course. So we thought through depth and quality, we can achieve much greater impact that way. So, for example, we're not trying to match pre-pandemic visitor numbers now. We're the aim and the emphasis is on quality of engagement. If we happen to get more visitors than pre-pandemic, then that's all to the good. But another thing which sets the strategy apart, apart from this emphasis on depth and quality, is donut economics and sustainability, if you like. So the first of 6 outcomes in the strategy is about sustainability, and it talks about financial and environmental sustainability. So we would like to place the service somewhere within that donut ring of sustainability. So we're not trying to just go for bare numbers. We need to make whatever we do sustainable and enjoyable for our users.
I mean, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you say that trying to get back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of numbers, in terms of people through the door. I can understand that the quality is arguably more important than those sort of raw, the measure. If people come to the door but actually they're not enjoying what they see or what they experience, then there's not much point in doing that, is there? But presumably you do rely on nonetheless on people coming through the door for I mean, Lotherton Hall is a paid for. You have to pay to visit Lotherton. Abbey
Yeah,
House is a museum you can walk into.
yeah.
There are different models within the service.
Mm.
So you would imagine on one level that actually getting people through the door was important from a financial point of view, or maybe it's not.
Well, I think getting through the people through the door is important. So I'm not trying to undermine that or to call it into question, but it's what they do when they come, actually, which I'm really interested in. So opportunities for secondary spend, for example. So that could be through retail, it could be through events, it could be through room hire. Um, that's important, and arguably, if you're just chasing big numbers, you don't necessarily always spin the wheel to make to finance those numbers and to keep the doors open and to keep services running. So it was really a focus on the quality of experience, but also giving people opportunities to spend while they're here. And also to donate as well. So our donation per head of visitor is 7 pence at the moment. So there's a real tendency not to donate to our service, and I can understand why. Really, and we'll probably come on to this. But also, 54% of our visitors don't spend any money at all.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
4 of our venues are free, 5 are paid for. So as you say, Martin, there's a variety of models, but so it was about thinking more about the visit itself, thinking more about sustainability, in that some people can afford to pay more and they want to pay more for different types of experience. For example, at Temple Newsome, we've got a rooftop tour now, which is £25 a pop, and you might think, "Whoa, hang on a minute, that's a lot for a local authority museum." Actually, there's a real market for it. So those sessions, which are only 4 a year, are already sold out. By the way, you get your tea as well for that. So it's
That's right. That's not bad.
so it's actually balancing that the market and demand for a higher premium product, if you like, with a requirement, a strong social values in Leeds to make as much free as possible for as many people as possible. So it's about thinking more about the kind of mixed model that we need to sustain Leeds into the future.
Right, come on to talk a bit more about the financial side of things in a minute. But you mentioned Temple Newsome House, and you're sitting in Lotherton at the moment.
Yep.
Temple Newsome House listed, Lotherton not listed, but a fine building.
Yeah.
So I guess part of your role is actually acting as custodian for some of these really important buildings. You know, the buildings that are there, regardless of what goes on inside them, almost. How do you approach that as a service? The sort of the maintenance and development and keeping those buildings, those fine buildings, in good shape. What's your approach to that?
Well, first of all, it's a huge honour to look after, and as you say, Martin, to be custodian, because I feel that that we are passing through, and we better do a damn good job of looking after these things to pass on, especially because they're publicly funded and publicly accessible. The first thing to do is that we have been doing is understanding our buildings more. So, for example, there hadn't been a proper conservation management plan written for the whole estate at Temple Newsome before. There had been individual plans written, but we commissioned a couple of years ago a comprehensive conservation management plan for Temple Newsome and for this site as well, Lotherton, and for Thwaite Watermill. So that we have a strong baseline of significance and relevance. So we built into the brief for these conservation management plans, why are they special for academics and specialists, but how are they meaningful for other people as well? So that notion of relevance. So we have a baseline of significance and relevance so that we know that any changes that we make to those sites henceforth through maintenance or development respect what makes those sites very special. So it's conservation in its classic sense. So understanding the site is really important, first of all, so that we can form that baseline and produce maintenance plans. But also, there's an intention to use these sites. So they differ in a sense from classic historic sites in that they are well used. They're intended to be functioning museums. So Lotherton and Temple Newsome are not just historic house museums. They were always intended to be showplaces. So Temple Newsome was a prodigy house. It was meant to be a showpiece. Lotherton was given to the city council in the late 60s, and it was intended not to be a shrine to the family who gave it, but also to be a gallery, a showplace for art. So these places are used and well used. Another thing to say about especially the stately homes that we look after is that they run in partnership with colleagues in green spaces. So
Yes.
the main reason for the corporation purchasing Temple Newsam 101 years ago was not actually for the house, because the contents were sold separately. It was for the green space. So it's almost 1,000 acres around Temple Newsam, which were intended as the lungs of the city. Running these sites is really important to think about inside and outside, and health and well-being is a large part of what we do at both sites. Just on that subject as well, and hooking back, I suppose, to understanding them more, quick plug for a heritage conference that we have coming up at Temple Newsam later in the year called Public Houses, Civic Custodianship. So what sets historic house museums apart, those that are run by local authorities, and where are they heading in the future? So it's a 2-day conference on the 9th and 10th of October at Temple Newsam. So constantly trying to understand the sites so that we can use and develop them responsibly, but also running them in partnership with others.
Sorry, just to go back to the visitor numbers, I'm curious about, you know, how somewhere like Temple Newsam House, you know, how that compares with Lotherton in terms of the people that visit. How do those two compare?
Well, it depends what you're measuring, really. So,
Well, yeah.
so they're estimated to be 1.8 million users of the park at Temple Newsam annually. The house gets 26,000 people paying to go in. So that gives you an idea of the outside inside, really. Temple Newsam is, you know, the park is fully accessible from all directions. So there's a difference there between outside and inside. At Lotherton, the visitor numbers are, gosh, I'm trying to remember now, it's something like 90,000 into the house. And that's because the estate is much smaller, and it's got a boundary as well. So you need to pay to get into the estate. And once you're here, you may as well come into the house. So it's a different model entirely, actually. Between the two estates, even though the houses are run quite, you know, in quite a similar way, just in terms of their purpose and the decorative art that you'll see inside and the furniture.
I mean, how would thinking of Temple Newsam House as an example, how would you sort of can you think of other houses with this that form similar functions across the country that it's comparable with? You know, where you look and say, oh, you know, it does a similar thing to this house. Do you think about it in those terms and think about, well, how can we maybe, what are they doing there that we could do, and when they can ask the same question of us, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of really good examples of historic house museums specializing or diversifying their office, and not just assuming that they should be what people traditionally expected from historic house museums. So I'm thinking of NT sites, National Trust sites in particular. So Sudbury, it's a museum, so it's a stately home for children. So they've, you know, building on the family audiences, they took a decision in 2017 to specialize in being an historic house, stately home for kids, which I think is a really brave thing to do. Rainham Hall, which is in Essex, is another NT site. It's Georgian. The temptation was to make it a Georgian house, and then people would be interested, wouldn't they? Well, actually, there's a dwindling market for that kind of historic house experience. So instead of doing that, they program the house, so the contents are completely removed, and they program the house on a 2-3 year cycle, on a kind of exhibition program, which is a different way of doing it, really. So I think there's lots we can learn from, especially the National Trust in England, about how sites are thought about and working from the user to the site rather than the site back to the user.
Really interesting that. Could I come on to a particular site that and there's actually a question in the Q&A there about Thwaite Mill.
Yes.
So the council has been consulting on effectively the closure of the mill in the next year or so. As you say, not owned by Leeds City Council. It's leased from the Canals and Rivers Trust, I think.
Yep.
Could you just say a bit about the reason why this question has now been posed and being considered?
The first thing is the council's financial challenge. It's on a scale that's unprecedented. So the in-year deficit is £41 million. Next year, so that's 24-25, the deficit is £59 million. So to give you some idea, Leeds City Council doesn't hold that many reserves. So actually, if we were making no changes in the next financial year, we would have to issue a Section 114 notice, in other words, become bankrupt. So we needed to do something. We have 9 sites in the portfolio of Leeds Museums and Galleries. We own 8 of them. The one that isn't owned by us is Thwaite Watermill. The lease with Canal and River Trust ends in 2030 anyway. So we have proposed that the site is given back to Canal and River Trust earlier than 2030 so that we can begin to make savings. So the annual saving would be £220,000. So that's almost, we're going towards £900,000 saving between now and the ending of the lease, if we were to surrender it early. So it's not, we would ourselves be stepping back, but of course we've done some public consultation on what people expect to see in the future at Thwaite. And there are lots of interesting ideas in there, which we are working with Canal and River Trust on, should the decision be taken to terminate the lease early. So it's about the financial challenge that the council has experienced. It's about the fact that Thwaite is the only of our sites that's leased. It's also about the fact that there is no real collection at Thwaite. So I can't say that that's not a factor. We are a museum service. The most significant items at Thwaite are attached to the building. So the water wheels, which are still spinning, all of the other collection is largely imported as dressing, essentially. So as a museum service, I would question why, if we are the best operator necessarily for Thwaite. But the 2 main drivers are the council's financial challenge and the size of the saving that would be made should we surrender our lease or assign our lease earlier than 2030, really. It's no reflection of the work that's done by the team at Thwaite at all.
You say that as part of the consultation, it's not the intention that the council would simply sort of withdraw and that would be that. Because obviously something has to happen to the building, doesn't it?
It's grade 2 listed. So we already are in dialogue with Historic England. We have a close relationship with Canal and River Trust. We have a close relationship with the boaters. So there are a dozen boaters who use the site as well. There are also lots of local stakeholders who use the site from time to time. So we've had to factor in all of those considerations, really. But as I said earlier, the council really needs to make some tough decisions. Otherwise, it would be faced with a Section 114, unfortunately.
One last thing on this then. So you talk about the £220,000 in annual sort of cost. I mean, an alternative would be to find ways of finding finding extra money in that location to fund the 220. Is that something that's been looked at? Is there a way of sort of keeping it going in a way that doesn't cost £1 million over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's the council should just say that the council has invested significantly in Thwaite. So as recently as 5 years ago, £552,000 was spent on Thwaite on remedial repairs. One of the challenges with Thwaite is that it's on a river, and the river floods. And unfortunately, the islands that Thwaite Watermill is on, a third of that landmass floods every time the river air rises to a certain level. So in terms of development, it's a challenging site, really. And because the City Council doesn't own the site, there is less of an incentive to look at development, really. So that gives you some idea of the practicalities of developing the site. It's not an easy site to develop, I don't think. And also, just in terms of the other priorities that the council always has, it's a large estate that the council runs. So trying to make the case for one particular site for multi-million-pounds investment, which is what it would require, is tricky, actually. So, but that's not to say it couldn't be done by another operator.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you for that. We really appreciate you sort of discussing that with us. I wanted to talk a bit then, just talking a bit more about the how the service stacks up financially, and how you need to think about that increasingly, given the pressures that you've outlined to the council in terms of its revenue deficit and all the rest of it. I mean, you've recently established the Leeds Museums and Galleries Development Trust, which I guess is part of that conversation. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I should just say that the Leeds Museums and Galleries Development Trust is a fundraising charity.
Mm.
It's independent of the council. Its purpose is to raise money for large capital projects and programs. The model we followed is Barnsley Museum and Heritage Trust, which was formed, I think, in 2017, 2018. So it sits at arm's length from the city council. It's not there to plug gaps. So there's no intention for the trust to move into some of the areas
Sure.
where the council core funds at the moment. So that's an important distinction. But it will be there to provide additionality. So any specific projects that we would want to do or to develop any of our sites, for example, you mentioned Thwaite earlier. So if there is a site development initiative, it would be we would look to the charity to do that really. But just in terms of core funding, we're always looking for ways of developing the service, not just because of the pressure on local authority finances, but from a visitor perspective, I think it's healthy to do that anyway. We commissioned a commercial review, so it was a kind of review of everything that we do, just in terms of secondary spend opportunities, room hire, events, etc. A couple of years ago, we also had a fundraising review done at the same time. So we're constantly looking for ways of diversifying income over the next 5 years, because we will be required to do that. Another thing that we've been doing is looking at passive income. So there's a tax relief on new exhibitions that the government introduced in 2017, Museum and Galleries Exhibition Tax Relief. That's money that we would get back from spending anyway. So we set up a trading company, because it's not easy for a local authority to do this, but we're just about to make our first claim on that.
All right. Okay.
So that will bring in 6 figures annually for the council at very little cost, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
I mentioned we've set up the development trust, but we've also got one of our sites is actually held in trust by the council.
Right.
So Kirkstall Abbey is actually held by its own trust. So we'll be activating hopefully the benefits of being a charity while still be within the local authority. So that's kind of the balancing act we're trying to perform at the moment. And then just looking at different models for bringing in income, but without sacrificing some of our values as well. So we would always want, wherever possible, to keep free access at the city centre sites.
Yeah.
So City Museum and Leeds Art Gallery, those are really important, really well-used sites. We would try, we can't rule it out, of course, but we would try our damnedest to keep those as free as possible for as many people as possible.
Yeah. I was going to ask about that. So thanks for covering that one. So just a couple more things before we close then, David, from my perspective. But if anyone else has any questions they want to quickly fire on the Q&A, I can pick those up. I think we've covered. Someone has actually asked about, are there is there any other budgetary threat to historic sites? So I guess that's a question about actually other sites closing down, and I guess the answer to that at the moment is definitely not.
Not within my portfolio, no. But of course, the council also owns other historic buildings. So those are owned variously across the council, really. So it's probably a question for asset management within the council. So I couldn't say. I can say definitively for my own service, no. Not at the moment. But there might well be other proposals from elsewhere in the council. It's an enormous landowner.
Indeed. Yeah. So I think we had a chat a couple of years, 18 months ago, probably, isn't it now, when we had a sit down, and we were chatting about the collections that the service holds, and whether there were things that you would like to, in an ideal world, where you would develop the collection or whatever. I think you told me that dinosaurs was something Leeds lacked.
Yeah, they are. So it's whether we actually actively pursue dinosaurs. Well, the thing is, we've got to be quite careful. We have already policies on what we collect and what we don't collect, because even though we've got 1.3 million objects, we can't be collecting. We've got pressure on space, we've got pressure
Well,
on relevance as well. We might
yeah,
be interested, but other public, etc.
yeah.
So we've got to balance that with the council's financial situation. So we can't be spending too much money really on new acquisitions.
Mm,
But we remain open to collecting in those areas we're already collecting in. So
mm,
I know that that's a very vague response, but we are an avid collector of art, especially
mm,
with in terms of sculpture and art by British artists, especially local artists in the 20th century. So we'll continue in that area. We already continue collecting in archaeology. So the recent finds, for example, that we are going to be pursuing, just in the way that we pursued the West Yorkshire hoard back in
mm,
2008, and secured it for Leeds. So it's more a continuation of what we're already doing
mm,
rather
mm.
than a grand project to secure, I don't know, a new Henry Moore, or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just plug a blue plaque that we have coming up by that was you teed that up nicely. So we've got a blue plaque coming up for the artist Philip Naviaski.
Yeah.
So he was some of his art is in the collection. He was an 20th century artist.
Mm-hmm.
Lived on Scott Hall Road. His studio's still intact in the house that is owned by other people now. He has relatives in Leeds. So we'll be unveiling a blue plaque in the later in the year. Actually appeared on Antiques Roadshow a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So it's when they were at Roundhay Park. So that's
Yeah.
just something that's coming up. Could I finish off then just by if there are maybe one or two things that from your sort of perspective as head of service that people should have a look at. What would you think is maybe something that people are less familiar with, or in the collections, or a location, or
Mm-hmm.
what do you say?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the West Yorkshire Hoard. It just in terms
Mm,
of pizzazz. If you're in City Museum, search out the West Yorkshire Hoard, because I think it's a fascinating, beautiful collection of objects which we're not quite sure about, to be honest. So there's a degree of mystery there, because it was found in the Aberford area
mm,
in 2008, and it was jewels. So there are four rings in the hoard, but they're from different periods. So it's thought to be a 10th century hoard, but there are items from different centuries within this hoard. No coins, which makes it quite unusual as well as a hoard.
mm,
And then it was found in the year that City Museum was opened, which I always
mm,
think is quite nice. And there was a
mm,
public campaign to keep it in Leeds, which was successful. So I think there are all sorts of nice, and it's just a collection of beautiful objects
yeah.
from the early medieval period. The work of Jacob Kramer as well.
Mm,
I think
mm,
we've got 80 items in the collection which relate to Jacob Kramer, who was from modern day Ukraine,
mm,
but came as a kid to Leeds. His mother and father were autistic. He was a bit of a rebel, actually, Kramer, but he was an expressionist
mm,
painter. He taught at the School of Art. In fact, the School of Art was named
mm.
Kramer
Right.
School of Art for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Um, I love his expressionist paintings. He always said he was trying to capture both the physical and the spiritual, and they were kind of competing with each other. And his aim in life, I think, was to transgress, or to move from the physical to the holy spiritual. And his works are really dark and really powerful. So there's a painting on your way into the City Art Gallery on the left hand side, which dates from 1919. Hear our voice, O Lord, our God, and it's an old lady who's crying out, really. And we think this was inspired by pogroms in his native Ukraine. That's one of the reasons why the family moved to England. They couldn't afford to go to the States, incidentally, so they settled in England,
Mm,
and we're
mm,
thankful that they did. But it's a really powerful work. I have a personal preference for the kind of darkness of his expressionist paintings anyway.
mm,
Kramer was a really interesting local character. He was well connected, and we're really lucky to have had him in Leeds. So that's a kind of personal favourite of mine. I also love the Armley Hippo,
yeah.
which was found in the mid 19th century in a brickworks in Armley. And it's one of the most complete skeletons of a hippo, which dates back 130,000 years.
Mm,
And it was given to the old fill and lit. Well, they fill and lit as they are, but the fill and lit were the progenitors of the Civic collection as we know it now. The bones were found at the brickworks, and the curator then of the Fill and Lit Museum, which was on Park Row, was a guy called Henry Denny. And he was so excited by the find that he essentially bribed the people who were working, and he incentivized them bringing more bones back from the dig so that they'd be very careful. And he said these are huge bones; they couldn't be Christian. Was his reaction essentially. But just there was a parent hippo and two baby hippos, a woolly mammoth and an onyx, a kind of prehistoric descendant of cattle, found in the same area. So I like it in the sense that it's a dramatic object. If you see it in Life on Earth in City Museum, I like the local connection, which this was from, it's thought to be, the remains were found in Leeds because we used to be connected to a much larger continent, and they were probably deposited where they are, or close to where they are, in the interglacial period. So it was when Leeds was much warmer. So I love all sorts of the whole story, the nature of the objects themselves, and the fact that they were collected by the Fill and Lit and they now belong to the city. I just think there's a lovely connection there.
Those examples all sort of drawn, I guess, the things that are locally found locally, or from a local artist, but with significance perhaps beyond the city, which I think is quite an important way of looking at it, isn't it? And you talked about the physical and the spiritual. I guess that's a good metaphor for the service as a whole, isn't it? How you experience the physicality of the buildings and the landscape, and but also what you get as an individual from doing that. And I think that's
well, actually, so there's that aspect of people's reaction and reception to the objects that we care for on their behalf. But also, one of the things that struck me powerfully, actually, when I started in Leeds in 2021, was the strong social values, which run through the whole council, actually, including the museum service. So one example of that is the community engagement work that we do across all 9 sites, with all sorts of different users, and we provide job opportunities for people from all sorts of different backgrounds as well. So social values runs right through the service, really, and it's a really important aspect of what we do. We've had a loan box service which is available to schools, which contain real objects. So these are real objects from the city's collection, and there's an element of trust in that and value. So what you do with them is valuable; they are valuable. And also our picture library scheme has been running since the 60s continuously. It's the oldest continuously running picture library scheme, whereby for a small sum of money you can borrow items from the Civic collection to have on your wall. So I think there's a really strong social grounding essentially in the service, which gives it perhaps that spiritual nature. They call it spiritual, call it social, whatever.
That's brilliant. Right, it's 20 to 1, so we probably should wrap things up. That's been fascinating. Thank you for sparing the time. I know you've got a busy day at Wallerton, so really appreciate that. We will be posting a recording of this on our YouTube channel, so people that weren't able to attend today will be able to view that. I know that David, the trust values the work that David's service does, and we continue to look for opportunities to work with the service, and I know there'll be some opportunities coming up. We've got a note of the conference coming up in October. That sounds really interesting, so we'll make sure people are aware of that. We've got a couple more of these talking heads coming up. Council Leader James Lewis is going to be talking to me, and then we've got Cully Thiari from Leeds 2023 doing a bit of a retrospective on last year's Year of Culture. So please do join me for those. But I'd like to thank you, David, for sparing the time, and best of luck with the future. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.